Fire season's a coming, and that's a big concern for me. And that leads into the oil and gas topics that I'm going to be talking about. Currently in Aurora, Colorado, there are 32 proposed fracking wells to be put on 35 acres, 3,000 feet from the nearest resident and alongside the Aurora Reservoir. And if you understand it all, when you put an oil and gas or industrialized development along waterways, not only does it pollute the air and the soil, but it also pollutes the water. And many of those water sources and reservoirs are either natural or have been created so that people in the communities around could rely on those water sources for domestic agriculture and other uses. Of the White River region in Colorado, they have 12,111 acres in the BLM lands that are being proposed for oil and gas usage. Public comments to the BLM are currently open until April 14th, so I highly encourage you to check my resource to check page, look it up, and submit your public comment to the BLM and oppose it, because the White River itself, as well as the Yellow Creek, are being threatened by these specific parcels of these 12,100 acres of land that are to be implemented right along these river and waterways. And of course, any communities, the ecosystem, the environment, wildlife, people, established places downstream from the White River, if that area is impacted by oil spills, contamination, or pollution, the communities downstream would also inevitably be affected. Colorado state level, that's not limited to Colorado at all, because it includes Wyoming, Montana, and Oregon. Colorado's new Congressman Jeff Hurd recently proposed the Productive Public Lands Bill that would reopen millions and millions of acres of lands in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, and Oregon to oil and gas drilling, mining, lumber, and other natural resource exploration and excavation purposes. This includes, but is not limited to, all of the BLM land east of the Continental Divide in Colorado, and so much more. And this issue of wanting productive public lands for oil and gas drilling, mining, lumber, and other purposes, this is not an isolated issue. This is not a right or a left issue. This is not a red or a blue issue. This is not a lib or a dim issue. This is a global climate, American health, environmental, recreational issue, and so much more. It affects everybody, from the cowboys to the hippies, from the big game hunters to the tree-hugging hippies. It affects snowboarding, skiing, snowmobiling, snowshoeing, hunting, kayaking, fishing, canoeing, river rafting, biking, e-biking, mountain biking, dirt biking, 4x4 trail goers, campers, backpackers, day trippers, everyone from the vegans to the meat eaters. It is a concern of global climate, American health, natural disaster causes, affecting everyone from the ranchers to the paragliders, canyoneers, rock climbers, horseback riders, bird watchers, and so much more. So this is an issue that all across the board, we can get a little bit more curious, be a little bit more compassionate, and get into conversation with each other about. The issue of defending our conditioned ignorance and lessons in humility. This is a beautiful opportunity for us to all practice being willing to challenge and expand our mindsets, because I have noticed that we will defend our conditioned beliefs, values, and morals even if we do not agree with them, as long as we have still attached our identity and defined ourselves by these morals and these beliefs. Because until we are able to give ourselves the grace and love and compassion and the curiosity to be challenged in a curious way, to have our beliefs, to have our ideas, our thoughts, and our opinions challenged in a curious way, then we are threatened and we are aggressively defensive of beliefs, even if they are false. Society has always been, but is increasingly promoting and encouraging strong and outrageous, intense reactions in defense of distracted, mass manipulated, skewed, lulled into submission views and opinions in order to turn us against not only each other, but also to use our consciousness, our brain power, our psychology against ourselves. And partly this is misinformation and disinformation. We need to learn to vet and cite evidence of information that we think we learn, especially on the internet. And I've done this myself. It's easy to share information that turns out not to be true or not to be citable, but this is why I am pushing so importantly that we need to give ourselves compassion and grace enough to be willing to have our beliefs challenged, just with a little bit of curiosity. Minor to the most major issue, it is so vital to be able to accept, give compassion and grace for the fact that we are humans, that we may be mistaken, that we may be wrong in our belief, that we may have an overreactive emotion, that we may be responding to something that is perfectly fine happening in the present as if it were actually something bad happening in the past. For so many reasons and on so many levels, we must be willing to connect with more curiosity, genuine curiosity and compassion for ourselves and for others, so that we may actually learn to connect and unite and truly further understand any issues at stake, so we may be able to more genuinely and honestly and authentically connect with one another, and so that we may be willing to expand our mindset by being willing to have our beliefs and our opinions curiously challenged, so that we may expand our mindset. An understanding of conditioned, strong, and intense reactions, and being defensive of our ignorance, being defensive of our beliefs and morals and opinions, even if we don't fully agree and even if we are wrong. In understanding that, it is so helpful to be able to apply the moral and characteristic of being willing to look at both the pros and the cons of all issues and situations. For me, it's important to report on and share with the public, to share and connect on information that is true. And while we cannot be unbiased to the fullest extent, we can try to see from a neutral or both a bias in support and bias in opposition frame to fully get a full picture of any situation that it is that we are in, that we are facing as an economy, individual, and relationships, and environmental, political stances, and pretty much all things. And a big thing that I am just capitalizing on, and I feel like I care a lot about, is that if we implement this practice of giving ourselves loving kindness, compassionate curiosity, and the grace to be a human, to make mistakes, to have our beliefs challenged, to question our opinions with curiosity. If we can implement this practice of grace with ourselves in conversation and in interpersonal interactions, we will be able to learn so much more, connect so much deeper, more genuinely, more authentically, and we won't be so defined by and attached to our beliefs, so they won't be so threatened, and we won't continue to defend our ignorance. I feel like we vehemently defend our ignorance because, again, we as a person feel like our worth, our value is defined by the rightness of our beliefs, our opinions, our morals, our values, and our thoughts. We want to agree with other people. We don't want to be different. But sometimes it is so important to be different, and then sometimes it is so important to be willing to challenge and question your own beliefs and your feelings and your thoughts and your understanding of so many aspects and situations. And it is so vital to be able to begin approaching all conversations with compassion and grace, because if we can approach with more grace, we can release resistance to being wrong. And if we are willing to let ourselves be wrong once in a while, we will learn so much more and be so much more productive and impactful and be able to connect so much more deeply. Outdated, misaligned, conditioned beliefs are begging to be shed and shifted. Because while morals and values are not meant to change, beliefs and opinions are subject to change very often, especially when we become aware of and are educated and informed and acquire knowledge that we did not have before. That awareness will change our perspective, therefore changing our opinion, therefore sometimes changing our foundational belief. And I have seen in my own life how truly a false prejudice or a judgment or a criticism, an opinion or a belief that I heard in childhood that does not apply to me, I still have seen in my life how I defended it, and then how I have started to grow out of and evolve away from them and change.
here, I'm going to put all of the places in Colorado, the millions of acres of lands that would be affected by Colorado Congressman Hurd's proposals for productive public land usage, aka mining, oil, drilling, lumber, etc., all the places in Colorado. An exhaustive and growing list of resources, information, and ways to act to protect National Forest Service and BLM and other public protected lands from these things, resources to be involved and how to act and what to learn, basically. Also, there is a petition to oppose Congressman Hurd's plans to open these lands up to oil, and that's not all.
Okay, so I want you to have as much opportunity to fulfill your potential for being educated and informed on very important topics as you can possibly be. So I'm going to rapid fire a couple environmental energy causes and concerns for the environment, BLM, and other public lands and concerns in the West so that you can be aware. Currently in Aurora, Colorado, 32 fracking wells are being considered on 35 acres by Aurora near the Aurora Reservoir. There's also a geothermal power plant being proposed in Chaffee County, Colorado. Geothermal has never been done in Colorado, and there are several other places that are more suited for it than that valley. And lastly, the White River region, currently 1100 acres are being proposed for oil alongside a river, which would inevitably pollute and cause damage for communities downstream. So there's so many things that you can be involved in. I encourage you to learn, cite your information, be resourceful, and continue to stay informed.